Donald Trump welcomed to Windsor Castle by King Charles and senior royals. U.S. President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump are now being welcomed by the King and Queen at Windsor Castle's Green Drawing Room, where a special exhibition has been laid out to celebrate the UK's relationship with the US. The room features striking silk green wall hangings, which match the fabric of the antique settees and chairs, and elaborate gilded panels and doors. Among the items on display is the General History of Virginia by John Smith in 1624. It is the first edition and one of the earliest accounts of English colonies in North America. Original watercolours by Mark Catesby, including the summer duck, the striped skunk, the angel fish and the great ivory-billed woodpecker, are also on display. There are also other artefacts to mark America's independence from the United Kingdom, including the surrender of the British Army at Yorktown, a rare map published in Philadelphia in 1782 which marks an important part of the U.S.'s national heritage. The exhibition also shows the new era, including a photograph of President Reagan and Queen Elizabeth II during their stay at Windsor Castle riding horses back in 1982. The Queen in blue, and Catherine in red, burgundy. Is that sending a message? Royal expert Victoria Murphy thinks so. This seems a clear example of coordinated diplomatic dressing to me, to reflect the US flag, she tells me. It's an example of how the outfits can send a powerful diplomatic message. Sartorial choices during state visits are not by chance, agrees stylist and Vogue contributor Marion Quay. These are very intentional sartorial diplomacy plays. Here in central London, a fair way from the pomp and pageantry in Windsor, a large anti-Donald Trump protest has gathered close to BBC HQ for the beginning of a demonstration. This protest has been organised by the Stop Trump UK Coalition, a group of more than 50 campaign organisations, including climate, anti-racism and pro-Palestinian activists. Zoe Gardner, a political commentator and one of the organisers of today's protest, tells me that Trump represents everything that we hate. We want our government to show some backbone, and have a little bit of pride and represent that huge feeling of disgust at Donald Trump's politics in the UK, she says. The crowd have another hour or so to form up here before they start to march down towards Westminster. The royals and Trump are about to formally exchange gifts after eating lunch together. We've just learned what they'll be giving each other. The King and Queen will give the President a bespoke hand-bound leather volume to mark the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. He will also receive the Union flag that flew over Buckingham Palace on the day of his second inauguration in January 2025. They'll give the First Lady a silver and enamel bowl handcrafted by Northern Irish artist Cara Murphy and a personalised Anya Hindmarch handbag. We're told they'll also be jointly presented with a silver photograph frame engraved with their joint cipher. Trump will give the king a replica of a President Eisenhower sword as a reminder of the historical partnership that was critical to winning World War II. The Queen will be presented a Tiffany & Co. vintage 18K gold, diamond and ruby flower brooch. As we've just reported, there are some protesters here, but other views are available. Among the crowd outside Windsor Castle is a man wearing a Davy Crockett hat and blowing into a small horn. Shortly after the president's arrival, he gave it a blast and said Trump is the greatest president, which was met with a chorus of boos from parts of the crowd. A number of police officers, who are out lining the streets, were watching on closely. Outside Windsor Castle, there is a relatively small number of anti-Trump protesters holding signs demonstrating against the U.S. president. Amy Tysai tells me she protested last time Trump visited, and says it's important to make a stand. She says she has no issues with the decision to invite Trump as a head of state, but says the size and scale of this trip is beyond belief. She questions whether that's more for President Trump's ego. Melania's striking hat was a real talking point at her husband's inauguration earlier this year. There was an awkward moment when Trump tried to kiss her and the brim of her hat made it a tricky task. Cue the internet blowing up. The First Lady has gone for a dramatic flourish via the headgo again. She arrived at Windsor Castle today wearing a wide-brimmed purple hat which mostly obscured her face. She also wore a timeless dark grey suit. Melania's hat is not by chance, said Marion Quay, a celebrity stylist and Vogue contributor. The hat with the wide brim that hides her face is pointing to a stance where she wants all eyes on her husband and his agenda while here, she added. She noted that it matched the exact color of her husband's tie, in a nod to her support for her husband's agenda during this state visit. As the procession comes to a close, we're seeing some of the less glamorous behind-the-scenes action at Windsor now. Members of the cavalry are already packing things up and getting into a coach, less lavish than the ones we saw earlier, to be taken away from the castle grounds. I have stood in this quad watching ceremonial arrivals for a number of major events. Today there was just more of everything. More troops, more flags, more military bands. This was a show, a performance of royal soft power to please a president. Trump and the king are now inside Windsor Castle for a private lunch after the procession drew to a close. We're not expecting to see a great deal until a joint flypast by the Royal Air Force and U.S. Air Force later this afternoon. After that, Trump will lay a wreath at the Queen's gravesite, followed by a state banquet at St. George's Hall at Windsor Castle. We have been told what both the Queen and Princess of Wales wore to greet the President and First Lady. Queen Camilla is wearing a sapphire blue dress, a coat by Fiona Clare and a hat by Philip Tracy. The Princess of Wales is wearing an Amelia Wickstead dress and a hat by Jane Taylor. A strong showing for British designers.